Welcome to Miro's library. Gabriel García Márquez. 100 Years of Solitude is a masterwork of literature. It tells the story of 7 generations of the Buendía family in Macondo, capturing the town's birth and decay. The story opens with Colonel Aureliano Buendía facing a firing squad, reflecting time's cyclical nature. Márquez blends magical realism with daily life, making the extraordinary feel ordinary. Ultimately, the Buendías symbolize humanity's quest for knowledge and love, ending in solitude. Over 10 chapters, we will journey through Macondo's entire history. Join us as we explore this timeless epic. Chapter 1: The Founding of Macondo and the Magic of Melquíades. Welcome back to Miro's library. Long before it became a place haunted by political turmoil, destructive civil wars, and lingering ancestral ghosts, Macondo was merely a small, peaceful village of 20 adobe houses, built along the banks of a river with crystal transparent waters, which flowed gently over smooth white stones that were as large and smooth as prehistoric eggs. The world was still so young, untouched, and recent that many things in nature lacked official names, and in order to indicate or describe them, one simply had to point a physical finger directly toward them. It was in this undisturbed, isolated paradise that José Arcadio Buendía and his formidable, resilient wife, Ursula Woodun, decided to settle after fleeing their original hometown. They were driven away from their birthplace by heavy guilt, superstitious fear, and the relentless, haunting memory of Prudencio Aguilar, a proud man whom José Arcadio had killed in a tragic duel of honor, following a bitter personal insult. About his marriage, driven by a troubled conscience and the restless, wandering ghost of the young couple led a brave group of pioneer families across terrifying mountain ranges and dense, uncharted swamps for many exhausting months. Eventually, they reached this hidden clearing deep in the jungle, founding Macondo as a safe sanctuary far away from the rest of the world. José Arcadio Buendía was a natural leader and pioneer, full of boundless imagination, immense physical strength, and an extraordinary, obsessive curiosity regarding the secret physical laws and mysteries of the universe. Every year, around the pleasant month of March, a band of ragged, nomadic gypsies would set up their colorful tents near the perimeter of the village, bringing with them incredible new inventions from the outside world, creating immense noise, wonder, and uproar with loud whistles, theatrical performances, and Among these traveling gypsies was a heavy, mysterious man with a wild beard, dark eyes, and sparrow-like hands, who claimed to possess the key to Nostradamus's ancient predictions, and who quickly became José Arcadio Buendía's greatest intellectual mentor and most intimate friend. Melquíades introduced the isolated villagers to the amazing wonders of modern science and technology. Starting with a pair of massive, heavy magnets, he used them to drag heavy iron pots, lost nails, forgotten tools, and hidden metal objects right out of the timber walls and floors of the wooden houses, causing both dramatic panic and sheer amazement among the simple, uneducated inhabitants. José Arcadio Buendía, completely captivated by this magical demonstration, traded his family's precious livestock and remaining wealth to acquire the magnets, foolishly believing he could use them to extract vast amounts of buried gold from the mysterious depths of the earth. Though his grueling search yielded only a rusted piece of suit armor containing a lock of woman's hair and ancient coins, undeterred by his disappointing failure, he later acquired a large magnifying glass and a complex, heavy brass telescope from Melquíades. He spent grueling months locked away in a small, dark room, experimenting tirelessly with solar rays, calculating celestial movements, and eventually formulated the radical, mind-bending realization that the earth was round like an orange, a profound truth that deeply alarmed his deeply practical wife, Ursula, who represented hard work, economic stability, and grounded common sense, despaired over her husband's wildly obsessive nature, which constantly consumed their family, savings, and neglected their 2 growing children, José Arcadio and Aureliano. Furthermore, The very foundation of Macondo was shadowed from the start by a terrifying, ancient family curse. Jose Arcadio Buendía and Ursula were cousins, and their union was perpetually haunted by the ancient family belief that their offspring might be born with a genetic defect, specifically the tail of a pig. As Melquíades grew older, suffering from exotic tropical diseases, gathered during his endless travels across the globe, he left behind alchemy sets, strange glass instruments, and obscure manuscripts written in coded Sanskrit, establishing a mysterious intellectual legacy that would haunt and shape future generations of the Buendía family forever. Chapter 2: The Arrival of Rebeca and the Insomnia Plague. As Macondo continued to grow from a secluded wilderness settlement into a bustling, structured town, the solitary existence of the Buendía family was forever altered by the unexpected arrival of a strange, orphaned girl named Rebeca, carrying a small wooden trunk containing her parents' bones and a canvas bag filled with her mother's personal belongings. The weak, quiet child arrived unexpectedly at the doorstep of Jose Arcadio, Buendía, and Ursula Iguaran, although she was sent with a letter claiming she was a distant relative from their abandoned past. Neither Jose Arcadio nor Ursula could recall any such family ties. Rebeca was completely silent upon her arrival, refusing to eat any normal food provided to her, preferring instead to secretly satisfy her deep, mysterious appetite by eating dirt from the courtyard and scraping lime off the bedroom walls. Over time, through patience and strict affection, Ursula managed to break Rebeca's odd habits, integrating her into the household alongside her own children, Aureliano and Jose Arcadio. However, Rebeca brought with her a terrifying, silent contagion that would soon grip the entire settlement of the Insomnia Plague. The sickness began subtly, as family members realized they no longer felt the slightest urge to sleep, remaining wide awake through the night without experiencing any physical fatigue. Initially, the inhabitants celebrated this sudden absence of tiredness, viewing it as a miraculous opportunity to perform endless work, organize their homes, and complete chores that normally required days of effort. The true horror of the disease revealed itself only after several weeks of continuous wakefulness. The loss of sleep was accompanied by a far more destructive symptom: the gradual, systematic loss of memory. Victims began to forget the names and functions of everyday objects, followed by their own childhood memories, personal identities, and eventually the very meaning of words and language itself. Realizing the existential danger threatening Macondo, Buendía attempted to combat the spreading oblivion through a heroic effort of labeling. Armed with a brush and ink, he spent days marking every object in his house and throughout the town, writing distinct signs such as "This is a cow. She must be milked every morning to produce milk," hoping to preserve the connection between human thought and the physical world. Despite his meticulous labeling system, the loss of memory threatened to erase the town's collective consciousness entirely, reducing the inhabitants to a state of complete, peaceful ignorance where concepts no longer held any meaning. The crisis reached its peak as travelers entering Macondo were forced to wear bells around their necks, warning locals not to eat or drink anything offered by outsiders for fear of worsening the contagion. The town hung in a terrifying limbo between reality and total oblivion, disconnected from time and history, as the practical structures of daily life threatened to dissolve completely into the endless, waking fog. Salvation arrived unexpectedly in the form of Melquíades, who returned to Macondo after being rumored dead in distant lands, aging, battered by time, but carrying a vast repository of medical knowledge. The old gypsy produced a potent glass vial containing a glowing potion, capable of restoring lost memories. Upon drinking the elixir, Jose Arcadio Buendía and the rest of the town instantly regained their memories, weeping with joy as the names of their loved ones, the history of their founding, and the natural order of the world flooded back into their minds. Melquíades chose to stay with the family, taking up residence in a dark back room, where he dedicated his final years to writing mysterious, prophetic manuscripts on parchment using intricate Sanskrit code, leaving behind an enigmatic blueprint of Macondo's entire fate. Chapter 3: The Arrival of Civil War and Colonel Aureliano Buendía. As Macondo grew larger and more connected to the surrounding nation, the idyllic isolation that José Arcadio Buendía had fought so hard to establish began to fracture under the weight of external political authority. The central government sent Don Apolinar Massacre, a quiet and conservative magistrate, to establish official state control over the town. Initially, José Arcadio Buendía violently rejected the magistrate's authority, physically forcing him out of Macondo and declaring that the settlement needed no outside government or arbitrary laws to maintain peace. However, a peaceful compromise was eventually negotiated, allowing Don Apolinar Massacre to settle in town with his family, bringing a subtle political polarization that would forever alter the history of the Buendía family and the nation itself. During this period of transition, Aureliano Buendía, the quiet and introverted second son who possessed a mysterious, premonitory intuition, fell deeply in love with Remedios, the magistrate's youngest daughter. Despite her incredibly young age, Remedios captured Aureliano's heart with her innocence and sweetness, leading to a tender marriage that briefly united the liberal-leaning Buendías with the conservative magistrate's family. Remedios brought an abundance of joy, warmth, and harmony into the stern Buendía household, earning the deep affection of her. Tragically, this period of domestic happiness was cut short when Remedios died suddenly from severe pregnancy complications, plunging Aureliano into a profound, hollow sorrow that hardened his emotional reserve and detached him from ordinary domestic life. Political tension between the ruling conservatives and the opposing liberals soon erupted into a brutal, nationwide civil war. When Don Apolinar Massacre rigged local elections by stuffing voting urns with conservative ballots to ensure a government victory, Aureliano witnessed firsthand the corruption and tyranny of the state apparatus, driven by a deep sense of injustice rather than abstract political theory. Aureliano abandoned his peaceful career as a goldsmith, rallied a group of young local men, and declared himself in open rebellion against the conservative regime. Taking up arms, he assumed the title of Colonel Aureliano Buendía, launching a military campaign that would plunge the nation into decades of relentless warfare. Meanwhile, back in the patriarch José Arcadio Buendía was descending into irreversible madness. His obsessive pursuit of absolute knowledge, endless scientific theories, and lost memories culminated in a total breakdown where time ceased to flow for him, convincing him that every day was merely a repetition of Tuesday. After violently destroying his alchemy laboratory in a fit of rage, he had to be physically restrained by several strong men, bound to the trunk of a giant chestnut tree in the family courtyard. The founder of Macondo was left to speak in forgotten Latin phrases to the ghosts of his past, detached from the reality of the growing war outside. As Colonel Aureliano Buendía rode off to command liberal forces across the country, he left his quick-tempered nephew in charge of Macondo's local government and defense. Driven by a newfound sense of absolute authority, Arcadio quickly transformed into a brutal tyrant, enforcing arbitrary laws, executing political rivals, and ruling the town through fear until Ursula stepped in to put an end to his excesses. Thus, Macondo's innocence was permanently shattered, giving way to an era marked by military conflict, political betrayal, and personal tragedy. Chapter 4: The Peak of Civil War and the Execution of Arcadio. The nation remained engulfed in a relentless civil war that tore through every layer of society, leaving Macondo deeply scarred by political instability and arbitrary authority. When Colonel Aureliano Buendía left the town to lead liberal rebel forces across distant battlefields, he left his quick-tempered nephew in full administrative and military control of Arcadio, who had always struggled with feelings of inadequacy and unknown parentage, was instantly corrupted by the absolute power granted to him. He dressed in heavy military uniforms, marched through the dusty streets with an iron sword, and quickly established a ruthless dictatorship. He created arbitrary laws, imposed strict curfews, and ordered the execution of political opponents, including those who had simply supported the conservative magistrate. His cruel behavior reached such an extreme that his grandmother, Ursula Iguaden, was forced to step in personally, disarming him with a whip in the middle of the public square to put an end to his bloody tyranny and restore a sense of basic morality to the town. Despite Ursula's intervention, the reality of war soon struck Macondo with brutal force. Conservative military forces launched a massive siege against the town, easily crushing Arcadio's inexperienced local militia. After a short and desperate battle, Arcadio was captured by enemy troops. Facing a military firing squad against the cemetery wall, Arcadio experienced a sudden moment of profound clarity, reflecting on his lost youth, his unrequited love for pure, and the chaotic history of his family. He was executed without mercy, becoming yet another tragic casualty of a war that seemed to serve no clear purpose other than spreading grief and destruction across the land. Meanwhile, Colonel Aureliano Buendía became a legendary, almost mythical figure throughout the country. He survived 32 armed uprisings, escaped 14 assassination attempts, survived 73 ambushes, and avoided execution by a firing squad through miraculous circumstances. Yet, as the bloody war dragged on for years, the colonel began to lose sight of the original ideals that had driven him to take up arms in the first place. The ideological differences between liberals and conservatives blurred into meaningless political compromises made by corrupt party leaders in distant cities. Aureliano realized with bitter detachment that he was no longer fighting for justice, freedom, or the restoration of rights, but purely out of pride, habit, and the cold momentum of power. His heart gradually turned to stone, isolating him completely from the people he fought for and the family he had left behind. Back in Macondo, the original patriarch, José Arcadio Buendía, remained tied to the giant chestnut tree in the family courtyard, entirely detached from the violent conflicts of the outside world. He lived in a quiet, perpetual space where past and present merged into one continuous day. Ghosts of the past, including Prudencio Aguilar, visited him regularly to converse in forgotten Latin phrases. His physical strength slowly faded, and his mind drifted peacefully into final silence. When he finally died tied to the tree, Macondo witnessed a breathtaking event of magical realism. A tiny, silent shower of microscopic yellow flowers fell from the sky all through the night, carpeting the roofs, blocking the doors, and covering the streets in a soft golden blanket so dense that the town had to clear them away with rakes and shovels to make way for his funeral procession. Chapter 5. The End of the War, the Solitude of Aureliano, and the Arrival of the Banana Company. Following years of endless bloodshed and political disillusionment, Colonel Aureliano Buendía finally brought his long military career to a bitter close. Recognizing that the Liberal Party leadership had compromised all its original principles purely to secure power, the colonel refused to continue fighting a meaningless war. He organized the signing of the Treaty of Miro, an official surrender that formally dissolved the rebel army and ended decades of destructive civil conflict across the nation. Disillusioned, exhausted, and burdened by a profound inner coldness, Aureliano attempted to take his own life by shooting himself in the chest with a pistol. Miraculously, the bullet passed cleanly through his body without hitting any vital organs. Upon recovering from his wound, he permanently retired from politics and military life, retreating into his small, quiet workshop in Macondo to spend the rest of his days crafting delicate, miniature golden fish, only to melt them down and remake them in an endless, solitary cycle. During this period of post-war recovery, Macondo underwent a rapid and dramatic transformation, evolving from an isolated jungle town into a sprawling industrial center. The construction of the railway line permanently connected the village to the coast and the rest of the modern world. This new connectivity brought an overwhelming influx of foreigners, speculators, and workers, culminating in the arrival of the North American Banana Company, led by ambitious executives like Mr. Jack Brown. The foreign enterprise completely reshaped the local landscape, clearing vast tracts of virgin forest to build endless agricultural plantations. They constructed distinct fenced-off residential enclaves equipped with modern amenities, electric lights, and private security forces, creating a sharp division between the foreign administrators and the local labor force. The rapid economic growth brought a deceptive era of superficial prosperity, accompanied by strange and exotic new arrivals, who further complicated the town's social fabric. Among them was Remedios, the beauty, the daughter of Arcadio and Santa Sofia de la Piedad, whose incomparable, stunning physical perfection drove men to madness and despair, unaware of her extraordinary effect on others. Remedios lived in a state of absolute innocence, completely detached from societal norms, fashion, or romantic desires. Her presence in the Buendía home reached a legendary climax when, while helping Ursula fold white gin-soaked sheets in the garden, she was lifted into the air by a soft breeze and ascended physically into the heavens, vanishing forever into the high atmosphere alongside the floating linen. Meanwhile, the aging Ursula Iguaran began to lose her physical eyesight due to cataracts, entering a world of gradual shadow. However, rather than succumbing to helplessness, she developed a heightened intuitive clarity, learning to track the movement of family members by listening to the distinct sounds of their footsteps, their breathing patterns, and the subtle shifts in their daily routines. Through her heightened awareness, Ursula realized with deep sadness that the Buendía family was trapped in a repetitive historical loop where successive generations repeated the exact same mistakes, names, and tragic flaws of their ancestors, drifting inexorably toward isolation, emotional distance, and profound solitude. Chapter 6: The Great Banana Strike and the Massacre at the Station. As the North American Banana Company solidified its absolute dominance over Macondo's economy, the initial excitement of industrial modernization gave way to intense social exploitation and widespread labor anger. Tens of thousands of local plantation workers labored under brutal, dangerous conditions, receiving low pay and company scrip that could only be spent at foreign-owned commissaries, driven past their limits. The workers organized a massive union led by Jose Arcadio, a great-grandson of the town's founder who possessed a fierce, uncompromising passion for justice. The union presented a formal list of basic human demands, requesting clean drinking water, basic medical services, fair wages in real national currency, and 6-day work weeks. The foreign executives refused to negotiate, dismissing the workers' legitimate demands and using their immense influence over the national government to declare the striking laborers illegal, outlaws and subversives. Tensions reached a catastrophic breaking point when the government deployed armed military units to occupy the banana plantations and clear the railway lines. Thousands of striking workers, accompanied by their wives and young children, gathered peacefully in the open plaza outside the Macondo train station, believing they were assembling to hear an official address from the provincial governor. Instead, the military surrounded the massive, unarmed crowd on all sides, positioning heavy machine guns on the surrounding rooftops. An army officer stepped forward, read a brief government decree demanding immediate dispersal, and gave the crowded families 3 minutes to leave. The trapped citizens, packed tightly together in the stifling heat, remained frozen in place. When the timer expired, the soldiers opened fire directly into the dense crowd, discharging continuous volleys of heavy machine gun fire into men, women, and children for several terrifying minutes. Jose Arcadio II was knocked unconscious during the initial chaotic stampede, falling beneath a mountain of bleeding bodies. When he regained consciousness late that night, he discovered he was trapped inside a terrifying nightmare. He was lying aboard an endless, dark freight train consisting of more than 200 cars, filled to the roof with thousands of cold, stacked corpses. The train was traveling silently through the night toward the ocean, where the dead bodies were dumped into the deep sea like spoiled fruit. Sickened and horrified, Jose Arcadio II managed to jump off the moving train and began a long, painful journey back to Macondo. Upon his return, he was shocked to discover that the government had launched a massive campaign of complete psychological denial. The official state media declared that no violence had occurred, asserting that the workers had happily dissolved their union and returned to their homes in peace. When José Arcadio II attempted to tell the truth, he found that the citizens of Macondo had been completely brainwashed by official propaganda or were paralyzed by absolute fear. People insisted, with blank expressions, that nothing had happened at the train station and that Macondo was a peaceful, prosperous town. The complete erasure of historical truth drove José Arcadio II into profound, permanent isolation. Fearing military arrest, he hid inside the dark, forgotten back room of the Buendía house, the very room where Melquíades had once written his mysterious manuscripts. There, surrounded by dusty rolls of parchment and untouched books, he spent the remaining years of his life in total silence, obsessed with remembering the 3,000 victims of the massacre whom the rest of the world had chosen to forget, as if nature itself were conspiring with the state to erase the memory of the bloodbath. A torrential, unnatural rain began to fall upon Macondo shortly after the massacre. The skies opened up, unleashing a relentless downpour that showed no signs of stopping. This was not a temporary tropical storm, but a catastrophic deluge that would batter the roofs, flood the plantations, and submerge the dusty streets of Macondo in water and mud for years, signaling the beginning of the town's total physical and historical decline. Chapter 7. The 4-year rain and the decay of the torrential downpour that began shortly after the banana plantation massacre transformed into a continuous, merciless deluge that engulfed Macondo for 4 years, 11 months, and 2 days. The sky remained permanently dark, heavy with thick gray clouds that poured endless streams of water over the crumbling town. Wood rot set in across every wooden building. Leather furniture sprouted white mold, and the dusty streets turned into deep channels of thick, reddish mud. The constant sound of water hitting the roofs created a suffocating atmosphere of total stagnation, freezing time and trapping the remaining inhabitants inside their damp, humid homes. The economic prosperity brought by the banana company vanished as quickly as it had arrived. The foreign executives completely abandoned their flooded plantations, dismantling their equipment and leaving behind ruined machinery, abandoned enclaves, flooded fields, and empty promises. Inside the Buendía house, the long rain accelerated both the physical and psychological decay of the family. Ursula Iguaran, now ancient and completely blind, fought desperately against the total collapse of her household. Unable to distinguish day from night, she navigated the leaking corridors entirely by memory, trying to preserve basic order and keep the dampness from destroying the domestic foundation she had spent a century building. However, her authority was fading alongside her physical strength. As the rain battered the outer walls, the family members drifted deeper into their own isolated, private worlds. Colonel Aureliano Buendía remained shut in his dark workshop, completely untouched by the storm outside, continuously melting down his golden fish to forge new ones in an endless effort to numb his mind against past memories of bloody warfare. During this endless winter, Aureliano II, who had previously lived a life of wild, boundless feasts and passionate devotion to his mistress, Petra Coates, found his grand lifestyle completely ruined. The relentless rain wiped out his vast herds of livestock, which drowned in flooded pastures or starved as grass rotted beneath the thick mud. Returning to the main house, he spent his days in quiet isolation, forced to confront the hollow nature of his former excess and waste. Meanwhile, his legal wife, Fernanda del Carpio, spent her time writing long, bitter letters to her distant aristocratic family in the Highlands, clinging to rigid social formalities and meaningless religious rituals, while her immediate surroundings literally dissolved into mud and decay around her. The constant dampness also brought forth the final physical breakdown of the original patriarch, José Arcadio Buendía's long memory within the house. The dark back room where Melquíades had once written his parchments became a permanent sanctuary for José Arcadio II, who remained seated at the wooden desk, untroubled by the leaking ceiling, staring at the incomprehensible Sanskrit characters. He was convinced that the true history of Macondo and the 3,000 corpses dumped into the deep sea water, preserved exclusively. Within those obscure ancient pages, the house became filled with the scent of damp paper, old moss, and forgotten ghosts who walked the drenched corridors freely, taking advantage of the endless rain to blur the boundary between the living and the dead. When the rain finally stopped on a bright, clear morning, Macondo was completely unrecognizable. The sun emerged over a silent, ruined town where most of the houses were deserted, their roofs collapsed and their inner gardens overgrown with wild jungle vegetation. The population had plummeted drastically, leaving behind a ghost town of elderly survivors and forgotten memories. The dry air revealed the full extent of the destruction. The vibrant, pioneering settlement carved out of the swamp by Jose Arcadio, Buendía had been reduced to a fragile, decaying shadow of its former self, setting the tragic stage for the final, irreversible decline of the Buendía lineage. Chapter 8: The Death of the Pioneers and the Twilight of Macondo. With the end of the 4-year reign, the physical decay of Macondo accelerated into its final, irreversible phase. The bright sun that returned to the sky did not bring renewal. Instead, it dried out the rotted timber, cracked the clay walls, and exposed the full extent of the town's ruin. It was during this period of quiet collapse that the original generation of Macondo finally passed into history. Ursula Iwaran, who had lived for over a century and served as the moral anchor of the Buendía home, grew increasingly frail. Her mind began to wander between centuries, mistaking her great-grandchildren for her long-dead husband or sons. On a bright Good Friday, the ancient matriarch died quietly in her bed. Her death signaled the end of the family's structural integrity. Without her firm hand to maintain order, the sprawling Buendía house was quickly invaded by red ants, thick dust, and wild jungle weeds that began to swallow the courtyard. Not long after Ursula's passing, the last remnants of the old war era faded away forever. Colonel Aureliano Buendía had died years prior, slumped against the very chestnut tree where his father had been bound. Rebeca, who had spent decades living as a recluse in a decaying mansion on the edge of town, forgotten by the living world, was found dead in her bed, covered in a blanket of dry skin and dust. Furthermore, the twin brothers, Aureliano II and Jose Arcadio. Segundo died at the exact same hour on the exact same day. Even in death, their lifelong identity confusion continued. In the chaos of the double funeral, the townspeople accidentally swapped their coffins, burying each brother in the other's designated grave, permanently sealing their tangled destiny in the dirt of The house was left under the strict, oppressive management of Fernanda del Carpio, who grew increasingly isolated in her religious fanatical customs. She confined herself to her dark bedroom, corresponding with imaginary, invisible doctors regarding her internal ailments and maintaining a cold, hostile environment toward the few remaining family members. Her daughter, Renata Remedios, known as Mime, had previously been sent away to a distant convent after a tragic love affair with Mauricio Babylonia Young, mechanic always surrounded by yellow butterflies. Mauricio had been shot and paralyzed by guards, arranged by Fernanda to protect the family's social standing. In the quiet solitude of the convent, Mime gave birth to a secret child named Aureliano, who was quietly shipped back to Macondo in a basket and hidden away by Fernanda in the dark back rooms to conceal the family's dishonor. This hidden child, Aureliano Babylonia, grew up in absolute isolation, confined to the dusty interior of the Buendía estate. Unaware of his origin or the outside world, he possessed a natural brilliance and an insatiable appetite for reading. He spent his childhood wandering through the silent corridors, avoiding his bitter grandmother, until he discovered the long-locked room of Melquíades, guided by an invisible connection to the past. The boy devoted himself entirely to the old gypsy's room, surrounded by old manuscripts, ink, and decaying books, determined to master forgotten languages and unlock the secret prophecies that had sat untouched for decades. Meanwhile, the town of Macondo continued to shrink into absolute oblivion. The railway lines rusted away, the deserted buildings collapsed under the weight of tropical vines, and the remaining inhabitants lived like ghosts in a land forgotten by time and progress. The vibrant, ambitious settlement that Buendía had carved out of the wilderness was now a desolate, windswept ruin, waiting patiently for the final fulfillment of the dark fate that had been written for it from the very beginning. Chapter 9: The Final Romance and the Birth of the Last Buendía. As Macondo decayed further into complete ruin, the surviving members of the Buendía line drifted toward their inevitable, tragic fate. Aureliano Babylonia, who had grown up hidden away from the world in the crumbling family estate, reached young adulthood in total isolation. He possessed an incredible intellect, having spent years locked inside Melquíades' room, mastering ancient languages, reading obscure historical texts, and attempting to decipher the mysterious coded parchments. His solitary existence was suddenly transformed when Ursula returned to Macondo after spending years studying in Brussels. She arrived accompanied by her wealthy European husband, Gaston, bringing a brief burst of modern energy, vibrant colors, and ambitious plans to restore the decaying house to its former glory. Unaware that they were actually nephew and aunt, Aureliano and Amaranta Ursula felt an instant, irresistible physical and emotional attraction to one another. While Gaston was away in Europe, pursuing a business venture involving an airmail service, the intense tension between Aureliano and Ursula erupted into a passionate, consuming love affair. They abandoned all social rules, moral constraints, and domestic responsibilities, surrendering entirely to their wild romance inside the echoing, empty rooms of the ancient mansion. The outside world completely vanished for them. As the tropical vegetation crept through the cracked floors, and red ants devoured the furniture, the two lovers lived in a private universe of intense affection, completely oblivious to the doom gathering around them. During this period of absolute passion, Amaranta Ursula became pregnant with Aureliano's child. The couple welcomed the upcoming birth with immense joy, believing that their love would bring a new beginning to the shattered family line and breathe fresh life into the ghost town of However, the ancient family cursed the very terror that had driven their ancestors, Ursula y and José Arcadio. Buendía to live in fear a century earlier was about to be realized. When the child was finally born on a hot, silent afternoon, he appeared healthy and strong, but possessed a startling, unmistakable physical abnormality. He was born with the tail of a pig, the exact genetic flaw that the founders had spent their lives trying to avoid. Tragedy struck immediately following the birth. Amaranta Ursula suffered severe, uncontrollable hemorrhaging that the local midwife could not stop. Despite Aureliano's desperate, panicked attempts to save her, Amaranta Ursula bled to death within hours, leaving Aureliano broken, paralyzed by grief, and completely undone by sorrow. Drowning his unbearable pain in alcohol, Aureliano wandered blindly through the desolate, abandoned streets of Macondo all night, weeping for his lost love and leaving his newborn infant unattended in the drafty, silent house. When Aureliano finally stumbled back into the residence at dawn, sobered by a sudden, sickening realization of terror, he witnessed a horrifying sight that chilled him to the core. The newborn infant had been abandoned on the porch, where millions of hungry red ants had dragged the child into their hill, consuming him completely. Standing in the silent courtyard, staring at the empty, swarming ground, Aureliano remembered the opening line of Melquíades' mysterious manuscripts. In that exact moment of absolute shock, the secret key to the coded Sanskrit text suddenly flashed into his mind, unlocking the final prophecy that had waited 100 years to be read. Chapter 10: The Deciphering of the Manuscripts and the Apocalypse of Macondo. With his newborn son devoured by ants and Amaranta Ursula dead in her bed, Aureliano Babylonia stood alone in the silent, ruined Buendía estate. Driven by a sudden, absolute revelation, he rushed into Melquíades' dark workshop. The mysterious manuscripts which had sat untouched for a century, defying the comprehension of generations, finally opened their secrets to him. Aureliano realized with sudden clarity that the text was written in coded Sanskrit, orchestrated in alternate lines using Melquíades' private cipher. As he turned the ancient, fragile pages of parchment, he discovered that the document was not a mere collection of philosophical thoughts, but a complete, detailed chronicle of his entire family history, written by the gypsy 100 years before the events had even taken place. Aureliano read with breathtaking speed, skipping ahead to discover his own immediate past and identity. The pages revealed every intimate secret of the family line: the initial murder of Prudencio Aguilar, the founding of Macondo, the 32 civil wars of Colonel Aureliano, the banana plantation massacre, the 4-year reign, and his own secret parentage as the son of Meme and Mauricio Babylonia. He realized that everything that had occurred to the Buendía family was not a series of random coincidences, but an inescapable blueprint of destiny. Every action, tragedy, and moment of joy had been foretold down to the smallest detail by Mel, who had predicted the exact moment and manner in which the entire family line would dissolve into complete oblivion. As Aureliano reached the final pages of the manuscript, an extraordinary, violent storm began to gather outside the house. A colossal, apocalyptic hurricane swept down from the mountains, bringing fierce winds that tore through the abandoned streets of Macondo. The gale-force winds ripped away the rusted corrugated roofs, shattered the decayed wooden walls, and uprooted the ancient trees that had shaded the settlement since its founding. Aureliano felt no fear. Instead, he was completely spellbound by the text, reading furiously as the hurricane began to dismantle the very room around him. He learned from the parchment that he would not survive the reading of the final line, as his fate was irrevocably bound to the absolute destruction of the town itself. The manuscripts concluded with the terrifying prophecy that Macondo was a city of mirages that was destined to be completely wiped out by the wind and erased forever from human memory. As the ferocious hurricane tore the final walls of the Buendía mansion to pieces, scattering dust, furniture, and ancient memories into the howling void, Aureliano read the final sentence that sealed the lineage forever. The text declared with absolute finality that races condemned to 100 years of solitude did not have a second opportunity on earth. With that ultimate realization, Aureliano, the house, and the town of Macondo vanished entirely beneath the roaring wind, leaving behind only blank, empty earth where the legendary village had once stood. Thank you for spending this time with us on Miro's Library, tracing the 100-year journey of Macondo from its mythical beginnings to its final, wind-swept end. As the dramatic echoes of the Buendía saga slowly fade away, it is time to leave the stories behind and transition into a space of absolute peace. Allow yourself to fully unwind, let go of the thoughts, worries, and tensions of your day as you get comfortable in your bed. Close your eyes, take a deep, slow breath in, and let it out gently. Feel the comforting warmth of the crackling fire beside you, blending softly with the steady, rhythmic wave of the ocean shore. Let the ambient sounds of nature carry your mind into a deep, restful state of calm. Stay as long as you need, drift off gently, and sleep peacefully. Good night.